We'll continue now with Bassam Al-Baroni, who's the director and one of the founders of the Alexandria Contemporary Arts Forum in Egypt. He's a curator and a critic. And in case you're wondering about the timing of these talks, the speakers have a little monitor in front of them which counts down from 30 minutes, second by second, all the way to the last moment of their time. So they're extremely well informed about what's happening. Welcome, Bassam.
Thank you very much. Well, in case you're wondering about the bad art on view, I I just met Hal Foster this morning for the first time, so I'd like to call this presentation "The Return of the Real Bad Art." Okay, I don't want it. Don't want it to go automatically. I want it to stay. Okay, I'm the chief. I'm the boss. So, my presentation begins with me as a student at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Alexandria, where I studied painting. And after graduation, I had to deal with this kind of trauma of the predominance of bad art, which is something I later discovered to be the predominant form of art called fine art, I think all over the world. For contemporary art, fine art is really something hard to define, hard to swallow. Some people call it kitsch, some people call it naive, bad taste, a replica of a replica of a replica. But really, what I've been trying to do recently is trying to find reasons why fine art remains the majority practice around the world, and why contemporary art always resists interacting with this form of art. But on the whole, I would say that fine art really functions to prove its kind of purpose in large is that it's actually living proof of the incomplete project of modernity, or to be more precise, the incomplete projects of modernity. So, while I'm showing you these horrible pictures, I'd like to talk a little bit about the differences in between the universalities of fine art and contemporary art, which is what I feel is the real reason behind the inability of contemporary art to understand where fine art is coming from, and the inability of fine art to actually be functional and valid. So, there are two, I would say, two major universalities still at play within art in general. One I would call old school European universalism, and the other I would call multiculturalist universalism. So, how does old school European universalism work? The artistic canon of modernism managed to use its individuality as the medium of the universal, while considering the particulars of time, place, ethnicity, gender, and so on to be of a secondary nature. These particularities and what they were part of were in a way almost invisible to the canon. So, for example, Picasso could reference African sculpture as form, spiritual significance, and so on. But whatever he did with it, it was not really referencing or commenting on Africa or the idea of Africanness, simply because Africa was somehow invisible to his individual self, the creator of universality. Strangely enough, this explains why the ways of the canon could actually become popular all over the world without there being clear forms of resistance towards their aesthetics or their ethics, simply because at the core of the work there was prominently the individual and the ethics of individuality. So this made it possible for an artist from Africa or Asia to switch this equation around, with Europe being invisible to him or her, and her individuality being the nucleus from which universality emerges. As long as the source of universality was an individual with all her specifics of individuality, and was not a heavy-handed cultural entity or particularity outside the artistic self, it was not an issue to reappropriate or develop and build upon the mannerisms, techniques, and ideas of the canon. So here you have a rather rough chart that I made last night, trying to visualize how old school European universalism works and how multiculturalist universalism works. As you can see to your left, at the very core of the old school European universalism is the Enlightenment, which is within the body of the individual. And then the individual shines his or her universality to the world. While you can see in the other diagram, what you have is a kind of different dynamic. Universality is being squashed, and what you have is a bureaucratical, ethical, aesthetic system that is kind of controlling a core that is plural, which is a core of identity, culture, particularity. Now, this is the functional universality that is in place today, and it's also a paradoxical universality. Uh, strangely enough, it mostly fails to register in the life world. So, what I mean is that if you're on the street and you talk to somebody, the kind of multicultural universality that is and that actually works for the discursive art world is rarely recognized by most people. Whereas if you talk to them about Picasso's universality or Paul Klee's universality, then that somehow registers. And in a way, I call this other, the old school European universality, the ghost universalism, because it's a universalism that is shared within many areas of the world. So, for example, if you're an art student in Philadelphia or in Lima or in Alexandria, your line of study most of the time would be within the lineage of this universalism. And you would be able to share this ghost universalism that only works within the academic system somehow and within a small group of people after you graduate. And then you would be able to share this internationally, actually, without the need for a discursive art system. For example, for multiculturalist universalism, didn't just happen all of a sudden. This example is a painting by Paul Klee in one of his visits to Tunisia, which was greatly influential in his life work. And it's an example where the artist, as individual, shines his universality to the world. So it's within the first trope of universalism. If we speed forward to Boetti's mapper I can't remember what the tapestry paintings. We get the first kind of prediction of what this multicultural universalism will look like, in a way, without the system actually being, without its bureaucratic system being in place. The artist travels to Afghanistan, also an exotic location. A European artist, another European artist traveling to an exotic location. But instead of standing in front of the mosques and the trees and painting them, he collaborates with artisans from Afghanistan and he produces world maps. The act of the artist not being the core, the nucleus that spreads out the individuality, but actually inviting local artisans to produce the work, is somehow a prediction of how this very same logic, in a way, will take form within the years to come. It takes form throughout the 70s and eventually comes into place in the late 70s, early 80s as the system that controls the universalist system, the pragmatic universalist system that controls art. And when I say multiculturalism, I'm not really referring to this idea of multiculturalism kind of working on the idea of inclusion and ethnicities. I'm really referring to the whole structure of how the universalist paradigm works today in art, and its relationship to the life world, its bureaucratic relationship to the life world. So multi and cultural, it's really more, for me, reflective about many cultures and how everything, it's not cultures as in cultures like ethnicities and local cultures, but cultures as in everything being shifted into the domain, the rather abstract domain of culture. So, like the class struggle is shifted into the abstract domain of culture, gender, everything is shifted in art. No longer is just art, but it's part of this cultural paradigm. So it's a conglomerate of cultures, and this is for me the real meaning of multiculturalism. So back to to fine art. Regarding the overall predisposition of fine art today, perhaps there's no single exact reason for its continuity and its characteristics. But we can try to pinpoint a set of conditions that give it its momentum and crystallize its formulas, an equation that generates its continuity. So, for example, if I talk about the Egyptian context, which is, I think, similar to many other contexts, we need to look no further than the practices of the fine art schools, where art history is the first layer of informational grounding for the artificial resuscitation of the fine art mode of practice. Art history is delivered as a clear-cut story that links non-critical narratives of social-political history to artistic practice step by step in a deterministic formula. The idea is that artists' methodologies and subject matters were a logical result of their political and social environments, and that changes or shifts only occur as a direct result of changes or shifts in these environments. The implications of this mode of delivering art history are huge. It leads to a kind of fossilization of art through narrative. The idea of the end of art begins here. The end of art meaning contemporary art is not art. This is indirectly linked to the notion of the end of history. We are somehow led to an artificial time zone where we feel and act as if art's great achievements have been already inscribed as something permanent, and that now we exist in an era that can be described as an infinite intermission that starts after the end of this historical narrative. Putting a freeze on any attempt to step outside this zone, this artificial zone is cut off from the present and the future as much as it possibly can. Thus, the only valid artwork in this zone is one that has a direct and simple predecessor in art history, from ancient Egyptian to pop art. The artist must use indicators, symbols, signs, and devices that strongly connect him/her to the lineage of this art history. Otherwise, it will not be recognized as art. So, key here in the differentiation between how fine art connects with its source universality and how contemporary art connects with this source universality is a perception of each one's perception. It's the perception of each one's perception of art history, basically. So, fine art views history, but also art history and social political history as a scriptic catalogue. Its artists as characters in the theatre of aesthetic modernity. The fine artist's work's starting point is the imagined necessity of inserting his or her work in the encyclopedia of artistic identities and characters. So the idea here is that for the fine artist, or say the artist studying at a fine art college, the way he or she imagines art history, or is taught to imagine art history, is as a catalogue, or as I call it here, theatre of aesthetic modernity, where before I even begin to work, I have to connect to a certain character. I have to identify myself with a certain character, like, for example, the shaman, or the sufferer, the romantic sufferer. And then through this identification, I kind of personify this character, which is from the catalogue of art history, in my work. So an example, for example, would be the genre of the sufferer, or the pained, romantic, tortured individual. And here we have, in this stream of images, a work by Frida Kahlo, a work from the movement called Stuckism, which is a kind of fine arts movement that started in the UK and spread all over the world. A work by an artist from Kuwait in the 90s, Chris Burden. Another work by this artist, Gunther Bruce. So what I want to get here is that actually, even up until the late 70s, early 80s, most art produced all around the world, most of it, was actually related to the catalogue. This idea of the catalogue. Its source, I mean, the artist, even artists like, for example, Joseph Beuys, they could not kind of rid themselves from the influence of perceiving art history as a theatre of characters. So this, I think for example, what Beuys introduced was a kind of objectivity brought in from pedagogy. But within his kind of artistic self, he still started from himself, and he still related to the catalogue. Gradually over the years, I think the final shift over a long time, over a long period, happened in I would say the second half of the 80s, which is the change of perception from what I call the catalogue, or the theatre of aesthetic modernity, into what I call the archive state of mind. So here the artist's starting position is that art history is an open-ended archive. The artist is freed from having to start by relating oneself to a character or a personification within the catalogue of art history. The archive state of mind also claims that it produces knowledge. And for me, this is also, there's something very important about this, because there seems to be a kind of mix-up within the archive state of mind between information and knowledge. You know, like everything is suddenly knowledge, because it's based on the economy of production, knowledge production. So you can just be kind of refiltering or kind of combining archives and presenting them, and you're saying that you're producing knowledge. But actually you're not. You're kind of reiterating information. The contemporary artist sees no necessity inserting him or herself into the catalogue of artistic personas and characters. And it's very related to Badiou's idea of how not to be formalist romantic. So for old school European universalism and the first trope of universality, the catalogue state of mind, the question is always continuously how to be formalist romantic, how to not produce knowledge but to represent already existent knowledge through romantic and formulaic equations. Universality at work from the art starting in the mid-80s is actually the universality of the archive and not the universality of the artist. It's not from the individual self, but it's the universality of the archive itself. And I can explain what I mean by this. So if we take an example, Lawrence Weiner's work, unlike previous conceptual practices, in this series of works by Lawrence Weiner, one finds it very difficult to pinpoint the artist's character within the scriptic catalogue of artistic personas. There is a noticeable shift evident in these works. They tell us that art has made the complete transition from the perception of its history as a scriptic catalogue to the perception of it being an archive of ideas, images, macro histories, and identities. This shift signals a new equation of balance between subjectivity and objectivity. A work by my good friend Hassan Khan, an artist from Cairo. For me, this is also an example of how this shift manifests itself in contemporary practice. So this video is about the character being portrayed seems to be an artist within a very kind of volatile yet aggressive art scene, like, for example, the Cairo art scene. And it's basically her just talking about her colleagues in this kind of really tight situation of constant confrontation, a small circle of artists, internationalism and how internationalism plays out in a local scene. The thing is that in this work, we can relate to the emotions of the actress. We can relate to the textual material in the video, yet we cannot identify a clear model of the artist's character that we recognize from the catalogue of art history. The artist is not creating something from within himself and sending it out to the world as his universality, but through visual and textual signals, tapping into the shared pool of experience called the archive. So this is the difference. So, so for the if we take a like a case study of a hypothetical case study of a fine art student after graduating from a non-progressive art academy, you know, like non-progressive, like Goldsmiths is progressive. So they're studying somewhere which is, you know, not really on the map of art academies. What do they have as a choice? Not really, I think, a conscious choice, but a kind of choice that is always predetermined by biopolitics, yeah? So they have the choice of fine art. The first route he or she can select is to be a fine artist. Since this route's universality is dysfunctional, what it can generate is dead art void of any functional universality. In Europe, this also exists, but strangely enough, it is sometimes seen as alternative or underground. It becomes a lifestyle choice. This has to do with its original links with the idea of the individual as the medium for the universal. For example, the originally UK-based but now expanded movement called Stuckism promotes what it calls figurative art, in contrast to conceptual art. In the movement's manifesto we read, quote, "It's the Stuckist's duty to explore his/her neurosis and innocence through the making of paintings, displaying them in public, thereby enriching society by giving them shared form to individual experience and individual form to shared experience," unquote. This is formalist romantic art, portrayed as the authentic mode art should function in. In other contexts, such as those of Egypt, Ethiopia, or Azerbaijan, for example, fine art is the dominant practice in terms of numbers and general perception of what art is. The aesthetics of these practices are asking the opposite question of Badiou's contemporary art. They are asking, how do we become formalist romantic? The problem is that the question has already been answered numerous times, so your answers can only be ghosts, shadows of art already produced in Europe in the past 5 centuries. Route number 2, contemporary art condition A. Another option is to take the second route of becoming a contemporary artist who uncritically emphasizes, this is condition A, contemporary art condition A. Becoming a contemporary art who uncritically emphasizes the particularities of their perceived identity, the particularities of gender, religion, history, state politics, etc. Some artists, even well-known ones, start off working critically with these particularities, but end up being consumed by the particularities that they are trying to address. Contemporary art condition B. A third option is to practice as a contemporary artist who understands the mechanisms of the dominant ideology and its emphasis on particularisms. The plan becomes how to negotiate a methodology where you are dealing with particularistic material in a kind of semi-objective way, not assuming that it makes up your identity, but that somehow you remain outside of it, the archive. Examples, Rabia Meroueh, Walid Rad. Your third option is to be a fine contemporary artist. And this idea is that you're half and half. I'm finishing up. This is also you can find this type of practice where you use the devices and features of the contemporary but you're actually unable to fully let go of the catalog. You cannot make the full transition into the archive state of mind. So you have the leftovers of, or some kind of struggle in this transition going on. So, for example, one finds this a lot in media art practice, where media art is understood as the kind of the technical domain, and you produce interactive works or video and so on. But the sensuality of the work, the roots of it, still adhere to this this link to you as being the main source of universality. Can I take two more minutes? Okay. To wrap up, as an example of institutionalized multiculturalism, in the 80s, actually in the 70s, there was in New York, there was an institution established called the Friends of Puerto Rico Incorporated. And it had this amazing logo. It was really an institution established to promote so-called Hispanic art. I took this. I went to New York, and I managed to discover the archives of this institution, which later actually turned into something called the Cayman Gallery, and later in the 80s, actually in 1980, turned into the Museum of Contemporary Hispanic Art, which collapsed in 1985. What's intriguing about this institution, for me, it can become, you can see it in the logo. It's actually the three pillars that the multiculturalist universalism is based on: education, culture, understanding. And all we need to do is kind of look at applications or proposals, or open the website for any kind of contemporary art institute. And basically, these are the three pillars that you need to establish the bureaucracy of multiculturalism. And I think it's these three pillars that we need to tackle and need to readdress. So the project was simply inviting 8 artists to work with some of the archive of this institution. And one last comment. I mean, you can see in the beginning, when multiculturalism was still kind of like young, it was very kind of coarse. You know, you could still see the highly problematic nature of this kind of institutionalization of the discourse. You can see it in the books being produced by the Cayman Gallery. But later, this developed into a very complex diagram that now sometimes we just live with in the back of our heads without really facing and confronting. Thank you very much.